Final Fantasy IV, the novel. By Celeste Share. Category, Final Fantasy. Genre, Fantasy/Drama. Words, 205,250. Rating, T. Status, complete. Summary, based on the storylines of Final Fantasy IV DS and FF5e, the After Years, this is the story of Cecil Harvey, a dark knight whose journey for redemption draws himself, his best friend Kane and his lover Rosa into a dangerous battle for their planet. Chapter 1, Act 1, The Prelude to Adventure. It was a peaceful summer day on what they called the Blue Planet. The dazzling sapphire blue ocean was calm in its entirety, its only actions consisting of gently crashing upon the white sanded beaches scattered all throughout the world. The ever-shining golden sun was pouring its warming rays all over, and bringing light to even the darkest and deserted corners of the planet. The lush green earth was beginning to bloom with new summer growth, and farmers would soon till the rich soil beneath to plant their crops and graze their animals. But the normally blustery winds that inhabited the scorching deserts, northern villages, and mountain tops were not blowing strongly today. It was no matter though, as both birds and man could still fly to wherever their ambitions carried them without the wind's aid. Birds had wings. And men had airships.
Captain Cecil. We are about to arrive.
A young man let out a tired sigh and reached up with both hands, proceeding to unlatch the back of his heavy black battle helmet. Inside it he almost felt as if he were suffocating, both from the heat of his own breath being blown back against his face and from the overwhelming guilt of the treacherous deed he had just committed. However, he stopped himself at the last minute, silently concluding that any suffering he had to endure on his own part was well deserved. Underneath the helmet, tangled masses of silver hair were sticking to his scalp and face, and sticking in his crystal blue eyes. Sweat beaded down his peach and flawless complexion, and his whole body ached from exhaustion, despite barely having to lift a finger on his mission. Cecil Harvey, Dark Knight of the Kingdom Baron, was losing his edge.
Good.
Cecil finally replied, and with that, returned his gaze to the deck of the airship they were flying on back to Baron. His crew members, all men clad in shining red armor, appropriately named the Red Wings, turned to each other and started to speak in hushed whispers, not wanting their captain to hear them. They had abandoned their helmets and gauntlets already, letting the warm but dry summer wind created by the airship blow through their hair and run over their hands.
Why are we plundering and murdering innocent people?
One man with light blonde hair questioned.
It was our orders from King Baron.
Another trailed off.
It was our duty. I hope we do not have to keep doing this.
It seemed as if Cecil was not the only one who couldn't get the massacre at Mysidia out of his mind. The crew members all thought back to when they had forced their way through town to the Tower of Prayers, in search of the water crystal. At last, they had found the hidden crystal in the back of the tower, along with a slew of both white and black mages willing to throw away their lives to protect both the crystal and the elder of the tower, who was waiting with them. After much protesting on the elder's part, Cecil ordered his crew to charge, resulting in an instant bloodbath as swords pierced torsos before the mages could even open their mouths to cast a spell. Their lifeless bodies collapsed to the ground in blood-soaked heaps, and the elder gasped out, tears stinging the corners of his eyes as he watched his closest friends die right before his very eyes. Cecil stared up at him coldly, his dark sword pointed right at the elder's throat, not needing to say anything. The elder threw up his hands in defeat and stepped away from the crystal, allowing Cecil to pass over the dead bodies of the mages to grab the water crystal from its shining, silver dais. The whole room, made completely of mirrors, shined for a brief moment as Cecil took hold of the crystal and watched it glimmer in his hands, before dying out to a dull blue color. Cecil promptly turned and ordered his crew out of the room. The Red Wings took their leave and Cecil was about to follow, but was stopped when he saw the elder take a step toward him. Not saying anything, Cecil stared into his eyes and was shocked to see at what was reflected back in them. A cowardly knight clad in black armor, clutching onto a worthless jewel with blood-stained hands and a look of defeat in his gaze, despite having actually winning the prize of their mission. Before he did anything foolish, Cecil turned away and quickly ran out of the crystal room, out of the Tower of Prayers, out of Mysidia, and onto his airship, all without turning back once.
We take pride in being members of the Red Wings.
One Redwing exclaimed.
We are the most powerful force in Baron alongside the Dragoons.
Someone else added.
Stealing is out of the question. Shut up!
Cecil suddenly cried, and whirled around to face his crew, who all stared at their captain with open mouths and widened eyes. Cecil took a deep breath and tried to calm himself. There was nothing wrong or untrue about what the Red Wings were saying. Nothing wrong.
Captain!
One of the Red Wings protested.
We can't stand doing this anymore.
Cecil didn't quite know what to say. He didn't want to do it anymore either. But his loyalty to His Majesty, King Baron, was unwavering, no matter what he was ordered to do. He had to convince his crew that despite heavy hearts and doubtful consciences, what they were doing was absolutely necessary.
Listen.
Cecil began, and sighed.
Possessing the crystal is an essential factor for our prosperity. Moreover, His Majesty judged that the Mysidians knew too much about the secrets of the crystals. We are the Red Wings, the air force of the Kingdom Baron. The royal command is absolute. Captain!
The Red Wings trailed off, when suddenly a member of the crew ran up to Cecil, flailing his arms frantically.
Monsters!
Cecil widened his eyes, but contained his composure as he cleared his throat and put his hands on his hips.
Everyone! Battle positions, now!
As the crew scrambled to their places, a flock of float eyes, giant, round monsters with a tiny pair of wings and a large eye set in the middle of their heads flew up to the airship. Cecil stepped back a bit as two float eyes started wailing and lashing their claws at him in attack, and he reached down, pulling a small bottle filled with a fiery red liquid out of the leather pouch that hung from his belt.
Take this!
Cecil exclaimed, and tossed the bottle at the float eyes, resulting in a large explosion as the contents in the bottle set themselves off in a fantastic burst of flame and smoke. The float eyes disintegrated into the air, as all monsters do when they are killed, and Cecil saw that the Red Wings had also dispatched the rest of the flock that had attacked. However, one Red Wing suddenly collapsed to the deck of the ship, the armor over his right leg shredded from a float eye's claw, with blood draining out at an alarming rate.
Oh! God!
The man moaned, and Cecil ran over to him, kneeling to his side as he frantically tried to pop off the corked lid of a potion in his pouch so that he could pour it over the wound.
Are you all right?
Cecil asked, although the answer was quite obvious.
There are more coming.
A Red Wing cried, and Cecil gasped when he looked up and saw a gigantic, black raven looming over himself and the injured Red Wing. Not in a good position to use his sword, Cecil instead pulled out the last bottle he had in his pouch, and tossed it at the raven, smacking it right in the head as it exploded into a crash of thunderbolts and dazzling sparks. The raven let out a strangled cry and disappeared, much to Cecil's relief. He handed the potion to the injured Red Wing and stood up, looking around to see if there were any more accidents.
Is everyone okay?
Cecil questioned, and the entire crew nodded.
Yes, sir. But there are too many monsters these days. Too many, agreed.
Yes, Cecil sighed and looked up at the sky, which was slowly fading from a soft blue to gentle pinks, golds, and purples. Night was falling upon them.
It never used to be like this. Monsters used to lurk only in the darkest of lairs, or the most isolated corners of Earth. Now they are a common sight outside of all our villages, and even our airships cannot avoid them. I can't imagine what could be causing this to occur.
However, one of the crew members interrupted his thoughts.
Captain Cecil, sir, we are over Baron. Very well. Make a landing. Ah! Cecil. Bygone.
A young man with slicked-back golden hair and a smile chock full of sickening delight approached Cecil as he stepped into the first hall of the castle Baron. He was wearing deep scarlet-colored regal robes and many a badge decorated his left and right breast that clearly declared he was not just another soldier in the castle. He in fact, was Bygone, captain of the guards at Baron Castle, and also head of Baron's security and jailing system. He had cruel black eyes that would chill anyone to the bone who gazed into them, although they often clashed with the sweet smile on his face that he wore at all times.
Oh Cecil, is that the crystal of water?
Bygone asked, curiously tilting his head so that he could see what was tucked under Cecil's protective arm.
Yes.
Cecil trailed off, and shook his head.
But Bigan, you should have seen it. The Mysidians were so helpless.
Bigan blinked and nearly burst out laughing, giving Cecil a playful pat on the back as he stepped to his side and began to gently nudge him towards the throne room.
Oh Cecil, whatever are you trying to say?
Bigan finally let out a small laugh and shook his head, smiling even more.
This way.
Bigan promptly led Cecil straight through the castle to the throne room of His Majesty, King Baron. Cecil's eyes kept straying from their path every few moments to see if he could spot any familiar faces that he had been away from for what seemed like forever. However, none of his friends were in sight, not that that accounted for many people. Cecil could count the number of close friends he had on one hand. Letting out another sigh at the thought of that pathetic thought, Cecil continued walking with Bigan until they reached the heavy pair of doors that led to the throne room. At that moment, Bigan stopped, and Cecil looked up at him confusedly.
Please wait here,
Bigan said, and made a quick bow before turning and walking through the doors, deserting Cecil in the antechamber. Unfortunately for him, he could not hear a word of what was being discussed in the room only feet away from him.
Your Majesty!
Bigan exclaimed as he kneeled down before the King of Baron. The king was a rather pompous man in his 50s, a bit chunky in appearance with naturally angry dark eyes and a well-trimmed orange beard that consumed his lower jaw and the sides of his face. His large golden crown lined with red silk sat straight and square on his head, matching his imperial robes of red and white. He glared down at Bigan, and sat up a bit in his throne.
What is it, Bigan? Where is Cecil? I had word that he arrived, and you were to fetch him immediately. I did, Your Highness, but I'm afraid that our beloved Cecil has suddenly developed quite a rebellious air. Truly.
The king smirked a little and gestured with his hand for Bigan to stand back up.
Well done, Bigan. Please, by all means, send him in. We must do something about this. Yes, Your Majesty.
Bigan smiled and walked over to the throne room doors, holding them wide open to Cecil as he peered out at the dark night.
Cecil. His Majesty summons you. Please come in.
Cecil nodded and stepped inside, nearly jumping a foot in the air as Bigan slammed the heavy doors behind him. Regaining his composure, Cecil stepped up to Baron's throne and kneeled upon one knee, bowing his head in respect.
We thank you for successfully completing the mission,
Baron said stiffly.
Now, where is it? Here, my liege.
Cecil said, and Bigan stepped up, holding his hands out for the crystal. Cecil handed it to him, and after Bigan had looked it over with wide eyes and a slightly sadistic smile, he handed it to King Baron.
So?
Baron trailed off. His gaze filled with the image of the crystal before him as he lovingly ran his fingertips over it.
This is the water crystal of Mysidia.
He smiled and looked to Cecil.
Good job. Cecil, you may leave. Now.
Cecil blinked and stood up, his heart longing to protest the means of getting the crystal, but instead of saying anything, he turned away and began to walk toward the throne room doors. However, something inside stopped him. It was a small voice. Dim, unfamiliar, and barely audible, but it was still there. Seek the truth. It's your duty. Cecil turned back around and marched right back to the king and Bigan, who were too busy drooling over their new prize to pay much attention until Cecil cleared his throat and crossed his arms over his chest. Baron gasped and looked up, along with Bigan, whose smile had quickly melted into a hateful glare.
What?
King Baron questioned, and Bigan put his hands on his hips.
What do you want? We? The Red Wings and I?
Cecil trailed off and then slowly gained more confidence with his words. He could not turn back now.
We do not understand the meaning of the plundering and murder of innocent people. All for this crystal. Excuse me?
Baron questioned coldly, and clutched the crystal in his hands tighter as he narrowed his eyes.
Do I hear disdain in your tone for your orders, Cecil? Perhaps? Discontent? Disbelief in your Majesty? No.
Cecil protested weakly, and shook his head.
I mean... Cecil.
Baron barked, and slammed his fist on the arm of his throne.
If you cannot trust me, then this will lead to some problems down the road concerning your future with both the Red Wings and Baron. Distrust leads to treason, and treason, my boy, leads to both a dismissal from your post and a banishment from your kingdom.
Cecil widened his eyes and felt his voice get caught in his throat as the reality of this new situation he had once again brought upon himself crashed over his head.
Your Majesty!
Cecil cried, and Baron shook his head.
I hereby strip you of your title as Captain of the Red Wings. Be grateful that I did not take the latter action in my threat as well.
Please. Cecil cried again, taking a closer step to the king.
Hear me out. Guards!
Baigan suddenly cried, and the two navy-uniformed guards who had been keeping watch quietly in the back of the room made a rush for Cecil, each one grabbing his arm and dragging him back away from the king, toward the exit of the throne room.
Your Majesty!
Cecil protested, and the king stood up, tossing a small, golden ring with a glimmering ruby set at the top toward Cecil's struggling body. Cecil just barely managed to catch it in his teeth, as the guards still did not release his arms.
Go and hunt the phantom beast of the Misty Valley,
Baron ordered.
And when you are through, go to the village mist and deliver this ring. It is important that they get it quickly, as they have been expecting it for some time now. You may depart tomorrow morning. Ugh.
Cecil struggled more against the guard's grip when suddenly the throne room doors flew open, and a new figure marched his way swiftly into the room, past Cecil and up to the king himself. He was clad in shining emerald green armor that took form to his slim yet built body nicely, and had a helmet on that was the shape of a dragon's face, with peering yellow eyes set atop it. His face was visible underneath the helmet, a rather beautiful and majestic one that had shining blue eyes and a perfectly straight nose set over his lips, which were pressed together in anger.
Now listen here.
The man cried.
Cecil didn't mean any harm.
With that, one of the guards tossed Cecil to his partner, and reached up, grabbing the new man's left arm and immediately dragging him back. The man cried out and struggled against the guard's grip, but it was too strong.
If you are that concerned about your friend, then you shall join him, Cain.
The king ordered.
Your Majesty!
Cecil exclaimed, and the king turned his back and dismissed them with a wave of his hand.
Go now, and deliver the ring. I shan't speak another word to either of you until you come back here. Mission completed. Now out. No, wait.
Cecil cried, but before he knew what was happening, he was tossed out of the throne room with one violent push from the guard. Cain went flying out a few moments later, stumbling backwards as the doors ahead of them slammed shut and were locked immediately after with a loud click. Cecil let out a frustrated moan as he looked to the floor, and Cain regained his senses and looked over at his friend, pity filling his features. Slowly, he walked to Cecil's side and slipped an arm around his shoulder.
Sorry, Cain.
Cecil sighed.
It's my ignorance that got you mixed up in all this. Hey, don't worry about it too much,
Cain said gently.
He'll put you back in command of the Red Wings after this mission. And with me by your side, there's no chance in hell you'll fail.
Cain laughed a little and tried to get Cecil to laugh with him, but it was clearly not working. Cain sighed and dropped his arm back to his side.
Hey Cecil. Maybe you should just get to bed early tonight. I'm sure that after a long rest you'll feel more up to going tomorrow.
At that moment, a few loud shouts came from across the room, from a corner where a table had been occupied by a few Red Wings who looked like they were about to start a mini celebration for their homecoming with drinks.
Cecil. Cain. Get your asses over here. Maybe you're right,
Cecil said, and smiled a little.
Thanks Cain. No problem.
Cain gave a little wave, and with that, walked off to where the group of Red Wings were sitting, drinking, and calling for Cain and Cecil to come over. Cecil looked up, and, realizing that he really didn't feel like going to bed right away, decided to join them after all. He snuck up behind Cain and tapped his shoulder as a Red Wing slid Cain a drink from across the table. Cain looked up and laughed a little.
Is it morning already, Cecil? They were calling me too.
Cecil smiled a little, and sat down beside Cain, stealing his ale and taking a nice, long, refreshing gulp.
Hey!
Cain pretended to glare, and shook his head as he rested his cheek on his hand.
Well, I guess that will help you go to sleep faster.
Cecil nodded some as he set down the empty mug and sighed, resting his face in his hands.
I envy you, Cain. Wah!
Cain laughed a little and leaned in closer, trying to see if he heard his friend correctly.
You envy me? Cecil Harvey, captain of the Red Wings, Dark Knight of Baron, and the Kings? Normally right-hand man? You envy a lowly dragoon knight like me? Indeed,
Cecil nodded seriously.
You followed your father's footsteps of becoming a dragoon knight instead of becoming a dark knight like me. You resisted the king's desires for your own dreams.
Cain sighed a little and looked down at the bottom of the empty mug, biting his lower lip.
It's certainly not as perfect as it may seem, Cecil. While I am what I have always wanted to be, I am still not nearly as strong or as brave as my late father. Not to mention there is the fact that King Baron will always see me as the man who rejected his orders to train by the dark sword. I've never been trusted by him entirely like he has trusted you. Plus, you're so much more powerful than I'll ever hope to be.
That's not true, Cecil looked up at Cain.
I think we are evenly matched, both in strength and in the king's eyes. After all, His Majesty trained both of us at the same time, and treated us both like his own sons. It's only recently that his behavior has become so strange. You've got a point.
Cain agreed.
So keeping that in mind, maybe things will go back to normal soon.
He laughed a little.
500 GP says that I slay that phantom beast tomorrow. You're on.
Cecil smiled and stood up from his chair.
Thanks again, Cain. Now I think this time I'll really go to bed. You're such a lightweight when it comes to alcohol,
Cain smirked.
Good night, old friend.
Cecil gave a slight wave and with that, proceeded to his room, in the left tower of the castle. However, he still could not help but think about the king's drastic actions he witnessed that evening, despite Cain's assurance that it was truly something out of the ordinary, and that everything would be fine again in due time. I just don't understand any of it. Cecil thought to himself. He descended down a flight of stone stairs. I don't even understand myself. If I were truly the righteous knight that I was raised to become, then why did I let Baron order me to commit such a horrible sin in my Cydia? He looked up at the ceiling and blinked. At least taking the ring to Mist will be a bit gentler on my conscience. No murdering necessary to deliver a stupid piece of jewelry. He pulled out the ring and paused at the foot of the stairs, holding it up to the candlelight beaming from the walls. It was a simple ring, with a smooth gold band and a delicate ruby in the center. Cecil wasn't sure what it was for, exactly. Perhaps King Baron had recently entered into some sort of new treaty with the people of Mist. They were an elusive people, calling themselves summoners. Summoners had the ability to call upon monsters from another plane of existence and use them to fight on their behalf. Cecil had never met one personally, but he heard they were very powerful. However, the people of Mist kept to themselves and rarely ventured in the outside world. For as long as he could remember, they were a peaceful village.
Cecil.
Cecil heard hurried footsteps and turned around, shoving the ring in a hidden pocket. Coming down the stairs ahead of him was a young woman, with long, golden hair tumbling down her shoulders and a crystal tiara resting against her forehead. She had big, soft brown eyes, a complexion with the consistency of lightly whipped cream, and soft pink lips that hid her pearly teeth. She was dressed in a long, simple pink gown, with long sleeves that dangled down to her waist and a square neckline that showed off her elegant collar and swan-like neck. When she stepped up to Cecil, it could be seen that he was nearly a head and a half taller than her. As she spoke, she tilted her head a bit, and her crystal earrings that matched her tiara jingled softly. Rosa. Cecil thought to himself, his breath stopping in his throat. She grows more beautiful every day. God, I missed her so much. However, as soon as he gazed down into her innocent eyes, he felt a sharp guilt of pang spasm inside him. If she knew what we had to do on our mission? If she knew about the blood on my hands? Would she be giving me that tender gaze? He suddenly felt sick to his stomach.
Thank goodness you are all right,
she smiled, and reached out to give him a hug. However, Cecil didn't reciprocate, suddenly feeling as if his arms weighed a ton apiece. His mind was still spinning, and hardly noticed as Rosa frowned a little and stepped back, her feelings hurt.
I was so worried. You and your men left on such short notice.
That's right. I left without even telling her. Cecil mentally cursed himself. At the time, it seemed like it didn't matter and that he knew she would understand, but all of a sudden, it felt like it really did matter. He was such a goddamned liar. He decided it would be best if he just got Rosa out of his hair right now, so he could sit down and actually think of the way to break the news to her later that he was a murderer and a bastard.
We're okay,
Cecil said coolly, but thought in his head,
I wish I could say the same for the Mysidians.
Rosa stared up at Cecil for a few moments, wondering what in the world was going on. Finally, she sighed and reached out, touching his arm. He flinched unintentionally, and Rosa pulled her hand back quickly, as if she had been burned.
Cecil? I'll visit you later, okay?
Before he could reply, she quickly turned and ran back up the stairs, and stifled a sob. Cecil covered his face and let out a moan, kicking the door open and walking outside into the open area of the castle. He wasn't sure he understood what just happened, but he knew it was his fault. Rosa was a young woman of 19 who had been born and raised in Baron. Her mother, Joanna, was a retired white mage and her father was a late ex-dragoon, Damien Farrell. At a young age, Rosa had been brought into Baron Castle as a prodigy in white magic, the healing arts. She had grown up with both Cecil and Cain, but what was a childhood friendship soon became something deeper for her and Cecil. It was something that had gone unspoken for years and still continued so, yet everyone who saw them together just knew. It was a quiet affection that had bloomed into young love overnight. And yet, Cecil felt as if he should still formally court his love, which was the proper thing to do. Rosa's mother did not approve of their match at all, which was the main reason for him feeling that way. There were other things, deeper reasons that Cecil held in a hidden heart that made him fear getting too close to his childhood flame. He knew that Rosa's mother went into battle with her father as his personal protector and mage, but it was a love story that ended in tragedy. Cecil knew that in a particularly devastating battle for Baron, Joanna watched Damien get slain right before her eyes and die in her arms, her magic useless to save him. It seemed to be the destiny of a dark knight to die in battle. Not many survived to watch their own children grow, and Cecil didn't want to bring that kind of conflict into Rosa's peaceful life. Her mother seemed as keen as possible to keep Rosa off of a battlefield. He knew if he told her that though, she would be devastated. She would think that he did not love her. Even though it was painfully the opposite. That was just how things were for Cecil. As he crossed the open courtyard of the castle to get to his tower, Cecil was surprised by yet another visitor, this one an unruly older man with a wild orange beard and hair, a stout, short figure, and bug-like goggles fastened around his eyes. Cecil smiled as he pushed the goggles up to his forehead, wiping his sweaty brow which only resulted in black grease being rubbed against his skin. The man then rubbed his bulbous nose, his razor-sharp blue eyes narrowing, which made Cecil's smile fade a little. He was going 3 for 3 in unhappy reunions, it seemed.
Well, look who's back,
the man said in a gruff tone, which wasn't too far off from his normal tone.
Rosa was mighty worried about you. I told you before, and I'm only gonna tell you once again. If you ever make her cry, I'm gonna.
Cecil widened his eyes, and the man sighed, wiping his brow again. It certainly was a hot summer night.
I'm gonna not let you ride my airships.
Cecil sighed out a little and then smiled again, the man smiling with him.
So, how are my babies doing, anyway? I'll bet you and your grunts crashed them again, eh?
He stopped when he realized Cecil hadn't breathed one word, and put his hands on his hips.
What's the matter with you, boy? Well,
Cecil sighed. It was easier to explain what happened to Sid Polendina, the head engineer at Baron and the man who had actually invented Baron's airship legacy, but only slightly. Sid had pretty much played babysitter to Cecil, Cain, and Rosa while they were in the castle together, and was like a second father to all 3 of them. He wasn't sure where to begin. But before he knew it, the words, the events, the emotions were all pouring out of his mouth, and by the time he was finished, Sid looked shell-shocked. He grunted, his face red and angry, and started to holler.
What? The king demoted you to an errand boy? What about my red wings? They'll be a mess without you. What's come over the king? Maybe I should think twice about working on the new prototype he's been hounding me to finish. Hell, if I'm gonna let him use my beloved airships as killing machines. I don't know what's going on,
Cecil sighed.
Cain says we should just give it some time and...
But Sid was about to burst and interrupted him, loudly.
Cecil, you and me, we gotta stick together on this. Now, you go complete your mission and get back safe, you hear?
Cecil nodded, and Sid looked down at his watch.
Whoa, I've gotta get home, or my daughter's gonna kill me.
He gave a quick wave to Cecil, pushed him out of the way, and started dashing across the courtyard. Even though Sid sounded alarmed, Cecil was still just confused. Sid was the type of guy who was too quick to jump on a conspiracy theory, no matter what the situation. Cecil thought he worked too hard and needed to take a vacation, or better, retire. Finally, Cecil made it to the tower his bedroom was in, and began to climb another set of tiring stairs. He couldn't wait to peel off his armor, get into pajamas, and just get some sleep. As he came to the small room that led into his chambers, he accidentally bumped into one of the castle maids. She was carrying a bundle of sheets, and looked up at Cecil.
Sir, I've changed your sheets and tidied up your room. Thank you,
Cecil said, and pushed past her.
Good night, sir.
Cecil slammed his door behind him and sighed, finally removing his helmet and setting it down on a small wooden table. He shook his head, his silky and messy hair falling out and landing just mid-neck. After completely undressing and changing into rich silk pajamas that were a gift from Rosa a few years ago, he slid between his cool, crisp sheets, and laid down, the silver moonlight from the full moon that had risen illuminating his chamber from the small window beside his bed. Everything was completely silent save for the ticking of his clock. Cecil knew that there were still people working and talking outside, but you could never hear them from his room. Sighing out and turning on his side, he struggled to find a way to block the thoughts from his mind so that he could just give in to his tired body and pass out. What's happened to the king? He covets the crystals as if possessed. And he will resort to any means to get them. Nevertheless, I can't defy him. How can I cross the man that raised Cain and I as his very own? The chivalrous knight that I have adored and admired since childhood? I will not betray him. I can't. Suddenly, Cecil heard his door push open, and footsteps rush to his bed. However, he didn't move an inch. He could tell by the lightness of the stride that it could only be one person.
Cecil!
Rosa burst out, immediately sitting down on the edge of Cecil's bed and gently shaking his shoulder.
What is going on? You have only just returned from Mycedia, and now I hear that tomorrow you are going out to Mist to battle this phantom beast.
Cecil didn't turn around, and just let her keep shaking him. He had forgotten already that Rosa was going to visit, and he still wasn't in the mood.
Don't worry,
he grunted, closing his eyes. Rosa blinked and let go of him.
Cecil?
Rosa spoke in a softer tone now, and once again, Cecil felt terrible.
Please, look at me.
But he just couldn't. Instead, he sighed, clutching to his sheets tighter. What was the point in hiding it? Rosa would find out eventually. And if it wasn't from him, she would probably just be more upset.
In Mycedia, we killed innocent people. What? We had to kill the innocents in order to steal their crystal. It was horrible. But I guess it's my fate as a dark knight. Soon, I won't even feel any remorse for my actions.
Rosa took a breath and sighed.
Cecil. We both know that will never happen. Still, I can't defy the king. I'm a hopeless coward.
Finally, he turned in bed and faced her, marveling at the way the moonlight highlighted her hair and made her eyes dazzle. She was so beautiful, so trusting, and it made his heart ache.
This is it, Rosa. It's all just going to go downhill from here. I don't know why you just don't move on.
Rosa felt her eyes water, and Cecil sighed, turning away again.
All I do is make you cry. You don't need someone like that.
Rosa stood up from the bed and clenched her fist, her voice rising.
The Cecil I know would never whimper like this. The Cecil I love.
She trailed off, resting her hand over her pounding heart and trying to calm herself down.
You leave for Mist early tomorrow, right?
Cecil nodded.
Cain is coming too. So don't worry. I'll be fine. Please. Trust me.
Rosa sighed and leaned in.
Please come back safe, okay?
At first, Cecil didn't reply. Then slowly, he turned around and sat up, reaching up and gently caressing Rosa's cheek. She leaned in a little more, hopeful, and Cecil leaned in as well, cupping her face gently and watching her close her eyes. She could feel his breath on her lips, only inches away. But a few moments later, he pulled away and rolled back over. Rosa paused, opening her eyes and staring at the back of his head. Reaching up to touch her lips, she turned around and left, closing the door loudly behind her. Cecil closed his eyes and curled up into himself, cursing silently. No matter how much it hurts, I have to do it, Rosa. You won't go on your own, so I will just push and push until you realize that we are a mistake. I'm a different man from the one you knew last week. All of a sudden, everything is different. I'm sorry. The next morning, Cecil was running late as he ran down to the entryway of Baron Castle to meet up with Kane. And, of course as usual, Kane was punctual, resting against a pillar and laughing when he saw Cecil run up to him, gasping for breath.
"So, are you ready for some real combat?"
Kane asked teasingly, and Cecil grinned. Kane could help him forget his problems so easily.
"Always."
"Lead the way." Kane did a mocking bow, and Cecil laughed, proceeding ahead and signaling for the guards to open the grand double doors that allowed access to the outside world. Their first stop would be Barren Village, so that they could buy supplies and gather information, and then, they would take the road to Mist Cave, where the Phantom Beast was supposedly preventing entrance into Mist. Cecil looked back at the castle, which was shining in the early morning sun. Rosa was probably just waking up, and getting ready to attend to her studies. Usually, she would wake Cecil for missions like this, but this morning, she hadn't come. And so, the dark night Cecil was stripped of his command as captain of the Red Wings. He and the Master Dragoon Kane head toward the Dark Valley for the village Mist. The advent of the airship marked the realization of Baron's dreams, but also the birth of its militarism. With its Royal Air Force, Red Wings, Baron soon reigned supreme. Now, as monsters multiply and stir unrest, Baron only exploits its power to collect the world's crystals. Why? The crystals shed their light silently. End of chapter. Chapter end.